Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the topic of mental health. At Nivati, we're just a mental health platform, make it easy for proactive preventative mental health for employers and employees as an additional benefit. That's about all I'm going to say about the platform. If you want to learn more, I got a table, you can come chat with me afterwards. But today, what we're going to talk about specifically is how to start the conversation in the company. This is a topic that I am kind of more or less, it hits home for me, I suppose, in a way, because I remember being the manager and somebody coming and talking to me about their mental health issue, and I was like, I have no idea what to do, go talk to HR, right? Which is like not the right answer. And you in this room probably don't appreciate that answer as much. And I get that, right? And so what I realized though is I was not, like as you go, you become a manager because you have great experience and your experience puts you in position to start teaching people how to do whatever the job is that I was doing. But I was not prepared for the people skills that were required as a manager. That did not come. So we're going to talk about specifically what managers need in order to start this conversation on mental health, because I promise you it's coming if they haven't already. All right. This is a rhetorical question, but if you were to look at your employee base right now, how stressed do you feel your employee base is? Extremely, right? What's crazy, this is a statistic that came out after the pandemic, but 41%, according to a couple different sources out there, about 41% have clinical diagnosis of mental health. So that's not just like above average stress levels or anxiety from work. This is clinical levels of mental health or clinical diagnosis of mental health. So you could imagine that your employees probably are stressed. What's really concerning is 50% of the employees, I don't know how you get this particular stat, but this is the U.S. Center for Workforce on Mental Health, say 50% of employees will never actually seek help for their mental health issues. And the 50% that do, one, I guess you can say is brave. I feel like its number's way higher than 50%. But why are people not seeking mental health? There's this great study that came out that talks about specifically why people are not getting the help that they need. So there was a study that was done by the WHO where they actually addressed 56,000 different people who had clinical diagnosis of mental health, and they asked, why are you not getting the help that you need? And 26% of the people said there were what we call structural barriers. What that means is cost was an issue, transportation was an issue, it was just inconvenience, lack of availability. If you've ever tried to actually book with a counselor, you know how you've been put on a 6-8 week, sometimes even a 6-month waiting list to actually talk to somebody. Those are structural barriers. That's only 26%. 95% of the people actually said the reason they don't get the help they need is really attitudinal. It's the attitudes that they have towards mental health. And what that means is it will get better on its own. We tell ourselves this all the time. It's a lie that we perpetuate to ourselves. Why it feels better. The stigma associated with mental health is there. And that's the reason why your employees are not actually talking to the managers or to you about their mental health situation. So ask yourself this, are your managers actually ready to have this conversation? Because people are having issues, and they might not have to be diagnosable conditions to have issues worth talking about. But are your managers actually in a position to have this conversation? And when I was a manager, I am a manager, I'm a little bit better now working for this company. But before I was here, I was not in a great position. So we're going to talk about what it takes to get in the position to have this conversation. And then I have with me Haeli Harris, who's our lead clinician, and she's going to talk about the more important stuff of how to recognize mental health, what it is, the important stuff. All right, first and foremost, it's okay to talk about it. Right? That's the first thing your managers really need to understand, that it's okay to talk about mental health. I remember saying, like, the first thing that came to mind when this employee came to me is like, I am not prepared. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to say something I'm not supposed to say. Like, I don't want to perpetuate the issue, whatever the case may be. It's actually okay to talk about mental health. That I didn't realize at the time. you can see if you come to our table, some of you probably already have. I've got one on. Haley's got a sticker on, but we've got these stickers that, kind of perpetuate a good message that therapy's cool. It's okay to be not okay. Self-care isn't selfish. These are concepts that people have that we want to promote. It's okay to talk about mental health and to have these conversations. And then we'll talk more specifically on how to have some of these conversations. The other thing that your managers need to do is trust your employees. And I really push hard on this one here. I have a brother-in-law who probably would have thrived better 2 generations ago than he does now. Great guy, sweet spirit, we love him, right? But you kind of understand what I'm saying? I remember having this conversation. He's like, my employee told me she needed a day off because her head wasn't right. And I just could not believe that. And I was like, all right, hold on, stop, okay? You need to trust your employees. That is really important. There's a great book. I'll probably reference this a couple of times. There's a great book that just came out by Thomas Insel is his name. He was the head of the National Institute of Mental Health, if you don't know. The book's called Healing. And he poses this question quite a bit in this book, which I really love. If your employee comes to your office and they are coughing, how do you react? Get the hell out of here, right? Like, I don't want you around. Take a sick day. It's not a problem. We have no problem saying that when they're coughing, right? God forbid they come in and they have a cancer diagnosis. How do you react? They come in and they say, I can't get out of bed today because of my anxiety. How do you react? It's different. It's different. Why? We don't trust them. The hard part with mental illness, or just a mental suffering, so it's not even an illness sometimes, it's just not in a good space, is we don't see it, right? We can see the physical changes of somebody coughing. We can see the physical changes of somebody breaking an arm. We can't see what's happening in the head, and that's why we don't trust them. But you need to trust your employees when they say they need the day off or they need to take a break. This is really important too. Organizations, managers, executive teams. So those in the executive teams really need to lead the charge and lead with empathy. This makes a huge difference. We have companies that use our platform where the executive team is really embracing the platform, have open dialogues about mental health, talk about their personal struggles in mental health, right? And they have weekly meditations. They do all sorts of stuff, and it comes from the top down. Those companies who have those CEOs on our platform actually have a 3-time higher utilization from their employees because it's promoted from the top down, and their employees say, it's okay to have this conversation. And that's really important. Versus the companies where their CEOs won't let us engage with the employees, won't let us talk to them about mental health. It's taboo still within the company. They don't use the platform as much. It's actually sad, but we still try to make it a resource for them. Executives can actually be a huge catalyst for the conversations that go on in the office. And I would recommend that you bring your executives to the table when having a conversation about mental health. And here's the other thing is, this might be self-serving, sound self-serving, but don't wait till open enrollment to have this conversation. And the reason I say that is because open enrollment, like you all know, the conversations you have around open enrollment, all the benefits, all of the healthcare, the dental, the vision, all that other stuff, mental health will get washed away and lost in that conversation quickly. So don't wait for open enrollment to have this conversation. It needs to happen quicker for one, but also it's going to get lost with all the other stuff that you're doing during that time. All right, so it's okay to have the conversation. You need to trust your employees, and the execs need to lead with empathy. So if you will all just welcome Haeli to the conversation. Hopefully this will progress. She's going to talk about mental health and what that means and what we do about it here.
Okay, thanks, David. So part of our managers or people in the workforce being able to talk about mental health, we need to understand more about what mental health really is. As David said, it's a hard thing to actually see. And so it's really helpful when we can understand some of the signs and symptoms of mental health and how that might look for people. So first off, I always love to start with this quote from WHO about what mental health is. It's a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. One of my favorite parts about this quote is, can cope with the normal stresses of life. What we've been experiencing these last 2 years is not the normal stresses of life. This has been something that has really just poured gasoline on the mental health crisis that we were already in, and now we're recognizing that it's an even bigger problem than before. It's also important to understand, though, that just because you have mental struggles, you don't have to have a mental health disorder to be struggling with mental health. People can be struggling with their mental health when it comes to stress. They can feel stress, they can feel burnout, they can feel overwhelmed, and they can feel hopelessness. Just because they don't have a diagnosis does not mean they aren't struggling with their mental health. So how is mental health affecting our lives? What does it show up and look like? Well, we know a lot of it affects our emotions. It's going to affect the way that we feel and how we manage our emotions. It also affects our thoughts. I work a lot with thought patterns in therapy, as well as our behaviors, what's going on inside of us, how we respond to things that we're feeling inside, and how we react to things that are going on outside. When people are struggling with their mental health, they're going to respond differently than people that are not struggling with their mental health. And then we also know that it affects our physical health, as far as people that have mental illnesses, or let's say struggle with mental health, are more likely to be sick. They have a weaker immune system, and they're going to have higher risks of certain diseases like cardiovascular disease, endocrine system problems, and things like that. David, do you want to talk about this slide real quick?
All right. So one thing to note is mental health is actually expensive. I remember the first time I saw this, it blew me away. So the economic costs of some of the top diseases that we deal with here in the United States, number one on the list is mental health, mental disorders, $16 trillion in mental health disorders. Diabetes at 1.7 trillion. So like quite a bit, 10% of what the mental health, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease is close, but still, mental health, I didn't realize it was such a big cause in terms of economic impact to what we have. And the question is like, think about it, where does this cost come from? And there is actually an economic cost to the company, right? So obviously, the economic impact in terms of a company comes in work performance in a lot of ways, right? Difficult concentrating, sleep disturbances, physical issues, actually paying attention to work. There is this 200 million days lost in the workforce over the course of the year to mental fatigue, mental illness, mental disorder, right? And that averages out to about 25 to 30 days lost per employee who have a mental health issues. You ask yourself, there's no way I've taken 35 days of vacation or sick days, right? So where is this number actually coming from? Majority of it actually is what we call presenteeism. That is time lost when you're staring at the wall, not focused on your job. That's where the productivity is really lost. That's where it actually hits. So they may be coming to work, but they're not actually working. Ambition's gone, and all the other stuff that Haeli was talking about, it's not there. That presenteeism is where we're actually losing a lot of productivity in terms of the dollars associated with the company. All right, so here are common issues that Haeli's going to walk through.
So I want to talk about some of the most common ones that we're going to see usually in the workplace. Up here we have the common ones are depression, anxiety, and ADHD. Those are some of the more common ones we're going to have show up. And actually anxiety is the most prevalent mental health disorder. It's also the most treatable mental health disorder. And so it's really helpful to know when people are struggling with their anxiety and really encouraging them to get help because it is so treatable. Some other issues that we see when it comes to mental health are things like domestic violence, substance use, suicidal ideation, and things like that. So those things down there, we don't have those as a mental health disorder in our book, but we have seen those increase, and it's either been impacted by people's mental health or it affects their mental health. Some of the most common signs that we're going to see in these three highest disorders. Depression. So a lot of times with depression, people often think that a person is just going to be sad and that's all they are, and they're crying a lot. But I think a lot of us know that people hide depression really, really well, and they can function. It looks like they're functioning really well, but we know a lot of the times they're struggling sleeping, they're struggling with focusing, as well as with anxiety. And another common thing that is in depression and anxiety is irritability. Oftentimes when people come in with anger problems, or their partner says they're really irritable and ornery all the time, I will always look at depression and anxiety. So if you think of people in the workplace and how their behaviors are, those behaviors can be symptoms. With anxiety, there's a lot of excessive worry, constant fear. It's a fear-based disorder that we know of. And then ADHD. This one actually is getting a lot more attention over the last couple of years, and especially with adult onset is what we're seeing. And I think a lot of us know what ADHD is. Really difficult time focusing. They are less organized. They fidget a lot, and they talk excessively. Okay, David's going to talk now.
All right, so we've talked about what mental health is. We've talked about why the conversation's coming, right? So this is what your managers need to know when the conversation comes. A lot of managers tend to be A-type personalities, right? I being one of them. So the first thing you always want to do is try to solve the situation and try to figure out the problem. And you do not want your managers to figure out this problem. That's a problem for you as a company, right? Because that puts you in a position of liability, which you do not want to be in. But they need to understand that advice and solving the problems is not what the position that they need to be in, right? Like that's not why they're coming to the managers. The reason employees go to the managers is because that's generally the person they trust the most. And for somebody to actually talk about their mental health situation, they're going to go to a person that they trust. If they don't trust the person, they won't have the conversation with the person. If you all read Brene Brown, which if you haven't, you should, but she's got her original books and her original thought plan was all about vulnerability and showing vulnerability to people you trust. And you're not vulnerable with people you don't trust, right? Managers tend to be in that position, and A-type managers want to solve the problem, and you need to make sure that they don't try to do that. 2, I struggle with this. This is my number one flaw. Validation is incredibly important, and it's hard for some people to understand the difference between validating the person without validating the scenario. I can't do that very well. I have to remind myself often, and I'm sure your managers do too. Training on validation and how to validate the person without validating the situation is incredibly important, and I would recommend that training over and over and over again, just like you recommend sexual harassment training over and over and over again. Position of trust. We talked about this a little bit. The other thing on positions of trust is understanding that confidentiality is important. Like, do not have your managers talk about it in company meetings or team meetings or anything like that. They are in that position. That's why people are coming to them. So they need to have that responsibility to understand what that means. Pretty obvious. I get that, but it's not a bad thing to remind them. This is probably one of the most important things is have your managers know the resources available. We don't want them giving solutions. We don't want them giving advice, but we need to know where they should be pointing people to. Generally, you don't want to be the person that they're pointing people to. I get that, but what do you want them to be doing? What are the resources available? Do they have an EAP? Do they know how to use an EAP? Or do you have other resources that are there? And or people on site, whatever the case may be. Every organization is different. At the end of this deck, we have a whole list of hotlines that you can call, suicide prevention, whatever the case may be. Having those posted in the office is not a bad idea. Know those resources and make sure the managers know what those resources are. All right, and then Haley's going to talk about what not to say, because this is equally important.
So we also want our managers and people that are talking about mental health, because it comes into HR a lot as well. It's really important that we understand that the words that we say really impact a person that's struggling with their mental health. So there's certain phrases that we have up here as examples of things that we want to stay away from. It's all in your head. Just snap out of it. There is look at the bright side. That's I always hear people say, well, look at all the good things. And I understand that, especially as a counselor. I try to help people find those things. But when we say look at the good things, look at or positive vibes and all of that kind of stuff, we're really diminishing a person's feelings. It's like David talked about. We're not validating a person, and we're not validating that they're struggling mentally. So then we have examples of things that you can say. Ask them how they're coping, or how has work been stressful for you lately? I like when I get asked that. We do one-on-ones every week with our managers at Nivati, and I love that we have those kind of conversations so that I can be open. That gives me the opportunity as the employee to share if things are stressful for me. And then, of course, we want to always encourage everybody in the company, but especially leaders, managers, to have mental health best practices. Some examples we have up here are the education resources as far as different websites they can go to. Setting the example. Are the leaders, are the managers taking care of their mental health? Are they talking about mental health? Do they maybe... We do have the line, but are they talking about maybe their struggles or stress? Work is stressful for them sometimes. It normalizes the struggles for people that are struggling with mental health. Establish a meditation time for your team. This is something we're seeing more and more, especially with Nivati. This can be done in person, or it could be done online as well. But when we're scheduling meditation times, we're actually encouraging the team to take time out, take a step back from work, and do something for yourself. And then the last one is that ask the employees how they're doing. We love one-on-ones. They're a really great opportunity for people to have the chance to say, yeah, I'm struggling with something. Okay, now let's talk about some other tools that support mental health that can be encouraged by leaders, managers. We do know this study came out. Actually, I think David and I found it just like a month ago. 42% of people feel they're not doing enough to manage their stress. So that's almost half of the people feel they're not doing enough. And so what we have coming up are some options and things to encourage to help people to be able to manage their stress and to help them manage their mental health issues. One of the first ones is building a community. I love this quote: loneliness is a cause and effect of mental health. A lot of times when people are struggling with their mental health, and we see this as a symptom of depression, they isolate. A lot of the times people pull back. And then, so what we want to try to do in the workplace is create a community for people. When people feel that they're in a community, it helps their mental health. And it increases their feeling of being supported. A lot of the times when people step back, they push away their support system. Not purposely, they don't do it on purpose, but it's what happens. And then what's so hard though is that support system is what's going to help them with their mental health problem. Another helpful thing is talking about setting boundaries. Now, this one really can come from the leaders. When, as we spoke earlier about the leaders being an example, this is going to be one of those examples. Setting boundaries between you and work, creating that healthy life, home, work balance. These are just some ideas on ways to set boundaries. Having a set schedule is really helpful where we're working from home. A lot of people are working from home, so they just work all day and all night and on weekends. People have the notifications on their phone. on their watches. And so work is constantly coming in. So we really try to encourage people, turn off the notifications or set like a time, 5 o'clock, I'm done with work, no more responding. As well as on number 4, make a commute. So we used to have, we'd work and then we'd drive home or what long it was to get home. And we had that time to decompress from work. We don't really get that with working from home. So I always encourage people, create some kind of routine where say you're done at 5 o'clock and then you take 5 to 10 minutes to decompress before you go into the home. I like to do a little bit of a meditation. I have my office and my yoga room all together. And so after I'm done with work, I'll do a little meditation and then I go leave work at work and go into my home life. And try to keep at least one day free. And leaders need to be setting the example for this. If our leaders are sending Slack messages or sending emails on, let's say, a Sunday when the company's pretty much closed and people aren't supposed to be working, that's going to tell the employees, I want you to work right now. I'm sending you these messages, so work. And it gets really hard for employees. I had a client that he said, my boss keeps calling me on Sundays and he wants me to do things and I don't know what to do because he feels so pressured that he has to answer the call because it's his job. So he started doing it. Then it became an expectation. And so we had to work on that of how to put those boundaries in place and to let him know that it's okay to put those boundaries in place. So really encourage the leaders, the managers to be the example of setting those boundaries. Something that came up that was kind of interesting, you can see this. Boundary setting is more important actually for the younger generations. So what this shows is Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Baby Boomers. And the numbers are like taking breaks from work, spending less time on social media, saying no to social activities to focus on themselves, and spending less time reading, watching the news. And as you can see, the numbers are higher. The Gen Z is taking more breaks. They're spending more time for themselves, saying no to social media, watching their times on the news, where the highest is actually the baby boomers. So we know that the older generations are struggling a little bit more with setting boundaries. The younger generation's usually good, but what is key is getting that older generation talking and setting those boundaries as well, because it's so important to the new generation coming into the workforce. They are looking at the mental health of the company, and a lot of them are choosing companies to work for based on the culture of the company. And as I kind of spoke of earlier, when people are working remote, they are not as good at setting boundaries. So if you have employees that are working remotely, I encourage you to talk to the managers to be able to have those conversations and say, what are you doing for your employees to make sure that they are not working on non-working hours? How are we having those conversations? Those are conversations that are actually really good to have, because that opens up the door to those mental health conversations. And then the employee thinks, oh my gosh, this person really actually cares about my mental health. Part of practicing mental health and being the example is taking care of yourself. We have a quote, the self-care isn't selfish. I know self-care kind of gets heard about here and there, and a lot of the times I was guilty of this about 10, 12 years ago. Think that self-care was kind of selfish. I also thought self-care was like, I would go get a massage or just take a bubble bath, and that's what self-care was. Okay, now 10 years later, I'm a therapist. I totally understand now all about what self-care really is. There's a really fun meme that says the world could be on fire and your therapist will ask you, what is your self-care plan? Because of how important it is. So these are some tips for some self-care. We have to think more than just mental. Self-care for our mental health is also going to be physical activity, nutrition, going to the doctors, getting those regular checkups. That is also taking care of yourself. Mental and emotional can be things like writing in journals, doing meditation, having the regular schedule, setting those boundaries. Social. There is social self-care. Like I said, when people are struggling with mental health, they usually isolate. So a key in taking care of yourself and your mental health is making sure that you have a healthy support system and making sure that you're actually utilizing that support system and not isolating yourself from it. I am completely guilty of that. I often isolate myself and I'm like, I don't need anybody. I can do this all on my own, which I know I can. But I know that that's also not good for my mental health, and I need to have my social support system in place. One of the last things that I want to talk about that I think it's really important for companies and leaders to be talking about, and this comes in play for self-care as well, is mindfulness. Have all of you guys heard of this term, mindfulness? Okay. I'm going to kind of explain what my favorite way to explain mindfulness, aside from this quote here. Your body's in the present moment. Your body can only experience this present moment unless there's been instances of trauma. So when you have your body here, so many times what people do is disconnect and they start putting their minds everywhere else. And it creates an increase in anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, ADHD, PTSD. We know that when people are practicing mindfulness, that they have reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety. If you remember that slide that David showed earlier about the cost of people missing work is due to depression and anxiety. So if we're practicing more mindfulness and if we're talking about mindfulness, we're going to see decrease in those. It also shows to increase positive health behaviors. People are also having more physical health, higher physical health behaviors as well. So mindfulness practices can be done by practicing, it's called mindfulness exercises. Very simple. Focus on the 5 senses. Focus on the breath. Breath work's becoming more popular. Doing meditation. And that's why I do love to encourage companies to do meditation time, because it is proven that meditation increases people's mindfulness. And so when people are more mindful, they are going to work better and their mental health is going to be better. As well as yoga poses. So I'm a yoga instructor as well. And a lot of people, when they hear yoga, they think exercise stuff, all the poses, the flexibility part. That's fine if that's how you like to practice yoga. I think everyone needs to figure out their own way. The reason I love yoga so much and the reason I like to teach it is because it increases a person's mindfulness. That is my favorite thing to do for people when it comes to yoga, because I know that when they're practicing with me, they're going to have better mental health. So with that, do you guys mind if we take a mindful moment? It's one of my favorite things to do, so I'm glad we have time for this. Okay, so go ahead and get comfortable wherever you're sitting. We're going to have a nice active back, so that means a nice straight long spine. And the muscles in our body, in our back are relaxed. And let's go ahead and close our eyes. And if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, that's okay. Just find a soft gaze somewhere in front of you. And begin to focus on your breath. Just noticing how your breath maybe sounds, what it feels like coming in and out of the body. Notice if your chest and or stomach rise and fall. And right now, we're just noticing, so I don't want you to make it do anything. Just pay attention to how it feels. And as I guide you through this mindful moment, if you find your mind wandering, that's okay. Just bring it back to what we're doing. So if you aren't already, let's begin to breathe in through the nose and then out through the mouth or the nose, your choice. And now we're going to make the breath longer by adding 1 to 2 seconds onto each inhale and each exhale. Lengthening our breath, allowing a little more air in, and pushing a little more air out. I will guide you through what's called box breathing. This is often used with anxiety. I will talk through it. We'll breathe in for 4 counts, hold at the top for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold at the bottom for 4. And then we'll repeat that about 4 times through. So take a nice deep breath out and breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Last time in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. And then just allow your normal breathing pattern to return. So don't make your breath do anything. And now we're just going to take notice again. So we're going to notice again what it might sound like, what it feels like. Notice if there's a change in the rise and fall of your chest and or stomach. And if not, that's okay. And lastly, I want you to take notice if your mind or body feels any different from when you first started this today. And then go ahead and open your eyes. How do you guys feel after doing something like that? Good? Calm? I love it. That was 4 minutes. It took 4 minutes to do something like that. So I encourage you all here to try to practice these kind of things. I encourage you to encourage other people. Get the managers talking about these kind of things. Get the managers doing these types of things. And you will notice their increase in mindfulness. And then the hope is that there's a decrease in those anxiety and depression symptoms when we're practicing mindfulness. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, so that's a really tough thing. What I would recommend is having your leader spend half hour with Haeli, and just do one of these practices. It actually, so we have, it depends on how your leaders are. We have ROI calculators. There's a lot of ROI calculators out there, like if it's a money thing, if it's an experience thing, which sometimes it is, then, we can do kind of a workshop that's available. Those are available, bringing in other practitioners or whatnot. Another thing that we have available is sometimes we just bring in massage therapists, and sometimes that's enough to just start the conversation. Everybody loves a good back rub. And so there's a lot of different ways we can kind of maybe start this conversation. What I would suggest, though, is kind of figure out what the pain points are for the employee or for the managers. If it's employee retention, employee engagement, employee satisfaction, the conversation can tend to be a little bit easier and a lot more obvious. If it actually is more money driven, there are ROI calculators out there for you, and we can kind of talk through that if you need. I don't know. Does that help answer your question?
Can I add on to that?
Yeah, you've got a better answer for sure.
I would also encourage trying to it's about getting the conversation started with the leadership as well, if it's not yet anywhere in the company. And I think it's really important for them to understand all these new statistics coming out that the younger generations, which are going to be our workforce now, they are looking for a mentally healthy culture. That is the most important thing. And so you're going to lose employees if you don't have that. So I think by encouraging kind of like, hey, we need to have these conversations and get the leaders doing their own trainings first. And then the hope is that then they can do the trainings with the employees.
So we do weekly communities, and Paul, we bring in a third-party moderator, so it feels more natural and not salesy at all. But Paul does a really great job. He tells this point often in every single one of our meetings. He says the closest distance between two people is a story, which I've always really loved when he says that. And the reason I bring it up is because honestly, sometimes the best way to have a conversation about mental health is for people to share their story, their personal story with mental health. And I don't know, everybody, whether you have it personally an issue or not, or struggles personally or not, I guarantee all of us know somebody. And just the fact that we're willing to like start talking about the person that we know or what that experience has meant to us personally can kind of close that gap a little bit too. So I'd encourage that there. All right, back here. All right, I like that. I'm going to remember that next time somebody asks me that. Thank you. There was up here, right? Yeah. Yeah. I love it. You all can hear her in the back, I'm assuming. Is that? No. Okay. They started with a small day, like a day dedicated to mindfulness, Mindfulness Monday. And now over time, May, if you didn't know, I actually failed to mention this, is Mental Health Awareness Month. So now they've incorporated activities through the entire month because they piloted a day, taking your words back there, and extended it out. It's great. Thank you. Was there another question right here? Yes.
I think that could be great about like when we talk about the building the communities, and using it as an opportunity for that to bring in the self-care into those situations. So I think that would be good. If anyone has any other insight, we've got to go soon, but go ahead.
In creating emotion, I like that. Emotional intelligence, increasing that. All right, couple things, and we're gonna go. Aaron's gonna kick me out. All right, you're welcome to take a shot. Aaron, are you sharing slides? Is that default, or is that something I need to do? I'll share slides. I think I've got everybody registered who came to this. I'll share slides out, or you can send me an email. I've got business cards. Here are hotlines if you need pictures. I also have a great PDF that you can just print out and post up if you want. Just let me know on that. And then we do have this mental health fitness toolkit. It's a little bit more individual, but there's a QR code and a link if you want to download that. Again, it will be in the slides, and you can come talk to me at our booth. If you have more questions, by all means, Haeli and I are going to be there. We do have to leave a little bit early today, but we'll be there for the next couple hours. So come talk to Haeli and continue the conversation. Thank you so much for allowing us to speak to you today.